crack of the rifle was the sound of another chain locking into place around Jessica Dawson's life. Out in the Montana Valley, the buck dropped, a clean shot. It was 1878, and at 20 years old, Jessica felt more like a ghost than a woman, trailing her father through the crisp autumn air. She was a shadow he barely noticed. "A fine shot, father," she said, her voice thin against the vastness. Thomas Dawson didn't even turn around, just a grunt. He stomped forward, a man marching to claim a prize he felt entitled to, a prize that brought him no joy. His face was a road map of bitterness, carved deep in the 6 years since Jessica's mother had passed. He saw only grim satisfaction in the kill, another small victory against a world that had taken everything from him. Jessica gathered her skirts, the damn fabric catching on every rock and branch. Her father insisted. Proper attire, even for hunting. "Ain't no daughter of mine gonna be mistaken for some ranch hand," he'd snarl whenever she mentioned wearing trousers. Practicality was an insult to his sense of order. She tried again, a desperate attempt to bridge the chasm between them. "We'll have meat for the winter." "Won't have much of anything if Peterson follows through," he muttered, yanking his knife from its sheath. The blade gleamed. "Claims I owe him, for supplies we never got." Jessica bit her tongue. Samuel Peterson, the man who ran the general store in Whitlock, was as honest as they came. If he said they owed, they owed. But saying that would be like throwing a match on dry tinder. Her father's temper was a wildfire waiting for a spark. "I can handle the butchering tonight," she offered, changing the subject. He snorted, a sound of pure contempt. "And who'd want to eat meat cut by a woman's hand? You'll tend to your proper duties." He wiped blood on his trousers. "That new schoolhouse needs a teacher. You'd do well to present yourself before some other girl snaps up the position." Her heart sank like a stone in a deep well. This old song. "Father, I've told you. I don't want to teach. I want to work the ranch. With you." He straightened up, his hands dripping red, his eyes dark. "No daughter of mine is gonna waste away on a ranch. You'll marry soon enough. Until then, you'll do something respectable." The ride home was a silent, suffocating affair. The deer's body was a dead weight between them, a testament to the life they were living. Their ranch, once a place of hope, now felt like a prison. The 2-story house her father had built with love for her mother was now just a monument to better days, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin. As they neared the barn, a flicker of movement caught her eye. An unfamiliar horse was tied to the post, a magnificent black stallion, powerful and sleek, with a perfect white diamond between its eyes. It was a horse that belonged to a man with money, or a man with confidence, or both. "We have a visitor," she said, a strange mix of dread and curiosity fluttering in her chest. Her father squinted. "Ain't expecting nobody." He dismounted, his rifle still cradled in his arm like an extension of his own body. He stalked toward the house, leaving Jessica to tend to the horses. She gave their tired mounts a reassuring pat before hurrying after him, her heart thumping a nervous rhythm against her ribs. The front door was ajar. She pushed it open and found her father standing stiff as a board in the kitchen doorway. His back was a wall of tension, and beyond him, sitting at their table like he owned the place, was a man, a stranger. A steaming cup of coffee sat in front of him. "Mr. Dawson," the stranger said, his voice calm and steady. He rose to his feet. He was tall, lean, but with broad shoulders that spoke of hard work. "I apologize for the intrusion. Your housekeeper, Mrs. Walsh, said I could wait inside." Jessica moved to stand beside her father, getting her first real look at the man. Sun-bronzed skin, hair the color of sun-bleached wheat, and eyes the color of a clear summer sky. He'd placed his Stetson on the table, a sign of respect her father wouldn't appreciate. "Who in the hell are you?" Thomas demanded. The man didn't flinch. He extended a hand. "Ethan Keller. I've just purchased the old Wilson place, north of here." The Wilson place. The words hit Jessica like a physical blow. That ranch had been empty for 2 years, a beautiful stretch of land with the best water rights in the valley. Her father had talked for months about buying it, about expanding their own holdings. Her father ignored the outstretched hand. His own hands were clenched into fists. "Wilson promised me first claim on that land." Ethan Keller's hand dropped slowly to his side, but his polite, calm expression didn't waver. It was unsettling. "I wasn't aware of any such arrangement, sir. I bought the property, legal and square, from his son down in Denver." "That no-good son of his," Thomas spat. "Never worked a day in his life. He had no right to sell it." "Father," Jessica said softly, a warning in her voice. He shrugged her off like a pesky fly. "I won't have some city boy playing at ranching on my doorstep." And that's when Ethan Keller smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a slight upturn of his lips, but it was there. "I assure you, Mr. Dawson, I'm no stranger to ranch work. I pushed cattle in Wyoming for 8 years, saved every penny to buy my own spread." Jessica looked closer. His hands weren't soft. They were calloused and capable. His stance wasn't arrogant, but it was solid, rooted to the earth. This was no city boy. "Wyoming," her father scoffed, the word an insult. "Different country. Montana will break you before the first snow." "Perhaps," Ethan conceded, that calm smile still playing on his lips. "But I'm a fast learner. That's part of why I'm here. I hoped we could establish good relations, as neighbors." "We ain't neighbors," Thomas said, his voice flat and cold as a tombstone. "You're a trespasser on what should have been mine." A hot flush of embarrassment crept up Jessica's neck. "Mr. Keller, please, excuse my father. We've had a long day. Perhaps you join us for supper." Thomas's head whipped around, his eyes blazing. "Who gave you permission to invite strangers to my table?" "It's just common courtesy, father." "I don't need a slip of a girl telling me about courtesy in my own home," he growled, taking a step toward her. Ethan cleared his throat, a quiet sound that cut through the tension like a knife. "I should be going. I didn't mean to intrude." "No, please," Jessica insisted, moving toward the stove, desperate to smooth things over. "We have fresh venison. It'll only take a moment." Her father's hand shot out, his fingers closing around her wrist like a manacle. He yanked her back hard. "You'll do as you're told." Jessica winced, a sharp pain shooting up her arm. "Father, you're hurting me." Ethan Keller's voice was suddenly different. The politeness was gone, replaced by something harder. "Steel. Mr. Dawson, I think you should let go of your daughter." Thomas released her, but only to turn his full, terrifying rage on their guest. "You don't tell me how to handle my own family, boy." "No, sir, I don't," Ethan agreed, his voice dangerously level. "But I don't stand by and watch a woman be mistreated." "Mistreated?" Thomas laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Teaching respect is mistreatment now. This is what's wrong with the world. Too many soft-handed men who don't understand discipline." Jessica backed away, rubbing her bruised wrist. I'm going to start supper." "You'll do no such thing," her father snapped. "This man is leaving. Now." Ethan picked up his hat. "I apologize for the disturbance, Miss Dawson. It was a pleasure to meet you." "Get off my property," Thomas snarled, moving to block Jessica from Ethan's view. "I'm going," Ethan said, his calm infuriating. He settled the hat on his head and gave Jessica a final brief nod. "Ma'am." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Jessica stood there, a strange emptiness echoing in the silence he left behind. The storm hadn't passed. It had just been gathering strength. And now, she was alone in it. "You disrespected me," her father said, his voice a low, threatening rumble. "In front of a stranger. I was only being hospitable." "You were undermining me," he hissed, his face turning a dark, mottled red. "Just like your mother used to do." The mention of her mother was a lit fuse. "Don't you dare," Jessica whispered, a sudden fierce anger surging through her. "Don't you dare speak of her that way. She loved you, even when you made it impossible." His hand came up so fast she didn't have time to react. She flinched, bracing for the impact, her eyes squeezed shut. But the blow never landed. Instead, the front door burst open, splintering against the frame. Heavy boots thundered across the floor, and a voice, low and final, cut through the air. "No more." Jessica opened her eyes. Ethan Keller was standing between her and her father. His hand was wrapped around Thomas's raised wrist, stopping the blow cold. He held it in a grip of iron. Her father's face was a mask of pure, murderous rage. "You're a dead man, boy." "Maybe so," Ethan replied, his voice unnervingly calm. "But not before I make sure Miss Dawson is safe." Thomas struggled, trying to wrench his arm free. But the younger man was like a granite statue. He didn't budge. "This is none of your business." "I'm making it my business," Ethan said, his blue eyes locked on Thomas. "A man who raises his hand to a woman isn't much of a man at all." Jessica was frozen, a statue of a different kind. Shock, fear, and a flicker of something else. Awe. No one had ever stood up to her father, not since her mother died. "Miss Dawson," Ethan said, his gaze never leaving her father's face, "would you be so kind as to step outside for a moment?" She couldn't move. Her feet were rooted to the floorboards. "Please," he said again, a quiet insistence in his voice. She nodded, a jerky puppet-like motion, and backed away. She cast one last, terrified look at the two men locked in their silent battle before stumbling out onto the porch. The cool evening air was a shock to her lungs. Inside, she could hear voices, muffled, tense. She couldn't make out the words, only the raw, dangerous energy behind them. It felt like an eternity passed, each second stretched thin. Then the door opened. Ethan emerged, his face grim. "Your father and I," he said quietly, "have come to an understanding." "An understanding? What could that possibly mean?" "He's agreed. It might be best if you stayed elsewhere for a few days, just until he cools off." The words didn't make sense. "Stay elsewhere. I can't leave. This is my home." "I know," Ethan said, his voice gentle. "And I wouldn't suggest it if I thought you'd be safe here tonight." "Where would I go?" The question came out as a trembling whisper. "Everyone in town knows my father. They're afraid of him. No one would take me in." Ethan frowned, thinking. Then he looked at her, his expression serious. "I have a small cabin on my property. It was for the foreman. It's clean, and it's sound." He paused. "You'd be welcome to stay there. I'll take the main house. You'd be safe." Her mind reeled. Stay with him, a stranger. The impropriety of it was scandalous. But the alternative, staying here with her father in this state, felt far more dangerous. "Please, Miss Dawson," he said, seeming to read her thoughts. "I understand your concern, but I give you my word as a gentleman. Your reputation will be my first priority." She looked back at the closed door of the house. She could feel her father's rage simmering inside, a poison seeping through the walls. She had seen that look in his eyes before. It always ended badly. But tonight was different. Tonight, someone had seen. Someone had stepped in. "All right," she said, her voice barely audible. Just for tonight. Ethan nodded, a look of relief on his face. I'll saddle your horse. As they rode into the gathering dusk, away from the only home she had ever known, Jessica kept stealing glances at the man beside her. He rode with an easy confidence, a man at peace in the saddle. He hadn't left. He had stayed. Why did you come back? She finally asked. His eyes stayed on the trail ahead. I never left. I was halfway to my horse when I heard the shouting get louder. I figured I should probably stick around. That was foolish. My father. He has a temper. He shot men for less. He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, Some things are worth the risk. The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. The old Wilson ranch came into view, silhouetted against a spectacular sunset. The main house was a solid-looking thing, but the smaller cabin nestled in a stand of pines. That was to be her sanctuary. He lit a lamp inside, revealing a simple, clean room, a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a small table, a stove in the corner. It wasn't much. It was everything. It's perfect, she said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. There's some food in the cupboard, he said. I'll bring you a hot meal from the main house in a bit. Thank you, she said, the words feeling completely inadequate. For everything. He shifted, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. She met his eyes, her gaze steady. No, she said, her voice firm. They wouldn't have. I've lived with my father's temper my whole life, and you are the first person who ever intervened. He studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. Then he gave a slight nod. Then they weren't men worth knowing. He tipped his hat and left, leaving her alone in the quiet cabin. An hour later, he returned with a tray of hot food. Venison stew, fresh bread. It was the best meal she'd had in years. They ate at the small table, and the conversation was surprisingly easy. He told her about growing up in Nebraska, about losing his family's farm to a drought, about heading west to make his own way. Why Montana? She asked. Saw it once on a cattle drive, he said, a distant look in his eyes. Never forgot it. The mountains, the sky. It felt like a place a man could put down roots. Promised myself I'd come back. And here you are, she said with a small smile. Here I am, he agreed, and his smile in return did something strange to her heartbeat. When he left for the main house, promising to check on her in the morning, Jessica stood in the doorway and watched him go. A man she had met only hours ago had just saved her. But as she closed the door and slid the bolt into place, a new, unsettling thought crept in. What did this stranger, this self-proclaimed savior, really want with her? The next few days fell into a strange, quiet rhythm. Ethan worked from sunup to sundown, mending fences, clearing brush, wrestling the neglected ranch back to life. Jessica stayed in the cabin, cleaning, mending her own clothes, and slowly, cautiously, exploring the small world that was her temporary haven. She'd watch him from the window, this man of quiet strength and relentless energy. He never approached her during the day, never intruded on her solitude. He was giving her space. But in the evenings he would bring her supper, and they would talk. The conversations grew longer, more comfortable. She found herself telling him about her mother, about the happy years before grief had twisted her father into a stranger. He listened, truly listened, with an intensity that made her feel seen for the first time in a long, long time. But a part of her remained wary. His kindness was a balm, but it was also a mystery. Men in this territory didn't do things for free. Everyone wanted something. What was his angle? Was he trying to get leverage over her father, to force him to sell his land? Was she just a pawn in a larger game? On the fourth day, she saw a rider approaching. It was Mrs. Walsh, their housekeeper. Jessica's heart plummeted. The older woman dismounted, her face etched with worry. "Miss Jessica, your father sent me. He wants you to come home." Jessica felt a cold dread seep into her bones. Ethan had come out of the barn and was standing nearby, his expression unreadable. "He says he's sorry," Mrs. Walsh continued, but her eyes told a different story. "He says things will be different." Jessica looked from Mrs. Walsh to Ethan. His face was a stone mask. "You don't have to go back," he said, his voice low and even. "He's my father," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Mrs. Walsh took a deep breath. "If I may speak plainly, miss, I've worked for your father for 15 years. I knew him before your mother passed, and I've known him since. He doesn't change. He just gets quieter for a spell, before the storm hits again." The housekeeper's blunt honesty was a splash of cold water. "What would you do, Mrs. Walsh?" Jessica asked. The old woman sighed, her gaze drifting toward the horizon. "I'd find a way to make my own path, child. You're a grown woman, not his property." After Mrs. Walsh left, the silence felt heavy, charged with unspoken questions. Jessica walked to the edge of the property, staring back toward the ranch that was supposed to be her home. Ethan came and stood beside her, not too close, but there. "I can't go back," she said, the words a final, irrevocable decision. "You're welcome to stay," he said. "As long as you need. No strings attached." No strings attached. The phrase echoed in her mind. Was that even possible? She turned to face him, needing to understand. "Why? Why are you being so kind to me, Mr. Keller?" He seemed genuinely surprised by the question. "Why wouldn't I be? Most men wouldn't get involved. They wouldn't offer a woman they barely know shelter. It's not normal." He held her gaze, his blue eyes clear and direct. "I'm not most men, Jessica." And in that moment, she believed him. But the belief only deepened the mystery. If he wasn't like other men, then who was he? What drove a man to risk his life for a stranger and then ask for nothing in return? The question haunted her. That night she made a plan. She would go back to her father's house one last time. Not to stay, but to collect her things, her mother's locket, and the small bit of money she had saved. She was going to make her own path. When she told Ethan the next morning, his jaw tightened. "I'm going with you." It wasn't a question. "You don't have to," she started to say. "Yes," he said, cutting her off. "I do." The ride to the Dawson ranch was tense. The air was still, too still. The place looked deserted. "Father," Jessica called out as she pushed open the front door. The living room was a disaster. An overturned table, shattered glass from a whiskey bottle glittering on the floor. A cold fear gripped her. She moved toward her father's study, Ethan right behind her, his presence a solid, reassuring weight at her back. And there he was, Thomas Dawson, slumped in his chair at his desk, a half-empty bottle in his hand. He looked up as they entered, his eyes bloodshot and unfocused. When he saw Ethan, his face twisted into a drunken sneer. "So," he slurred, "you brought the stray dog back with you. Your mother would be so proud." Jessica flinched. "I've come for my things, Father. I'm not staying." He let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Running off with the first man who shows you an ounce of kindness. You're weaker than I ever thought." "Mr. Dawson," Ethan said, his voice calm but laced with contempt. "Your daughter is one of the strongest people I've ever met. You're just too blind to see it." Thomas staggered to his feet, swaying. "Don't you talk to me about my own daughter, boy." "I'll just get my things," Jessica said, trying to sidestep him and head for the stairs. His hand shot out, grabbing her arm in a surprisingly strong grip. "You're not going anywhere." Ethan moved in a blur. He didn't touch her father. He just stepped between them, a human shield. "Let her go." "Or what?" Thomas challenged, his foul breath washing over them. "You gonna hit an old man?" "No," Ethan said. "I'm going to stand right here, and you are not going to touch her again, ever." There was something in his voice, a finality, a promise of violence held in check by a thread of will. For a long, tense moment, the two men stared at each other. Then, with a sound of disgust, Thomas let go of Jessica's arm. He stumbled back to his chair, suddenly looking frail and old. "Take her then," he mumbled into his bottle. "She's just like her mother anyway, too headstrong for her own good." Jessica looked at the broken man at the desk and felt not anger, but a profound and hollow sadness. "I loved you, Father," she said softly, "but I can't live like this." He didn't look up. "Let's get your things," Ethan said gently, and guided her toward the stairs. She packed with frantic speed, her hands shaking. Clothes, a few books, her mother's silver locket. Ethan stood by the window, a silent guardian watching the yard. "What will you do now?" he asked as she closed the lid on her small trunk. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have a little money. Maybe go to Helena, find work." He turned from the window, his expression unreadable. "There might be another option." "What's that?" "The position of housekeeper, here at my ranch," he said formally. "The cabin would be yours to live in, and I'd pay you a fair wage." She stared at him. A job. It was a proper, respectable solution. It gave her a place to stay, an income, a shield for her reputation. It was also a way to stay near him. Her heart gave a painful lurch. "Is that really what you're asking me, Mr. Keller?" she asked, her voice quiet. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of vulnerability in them. "No, Miss Dawson, it isn't. But it's all I have the right to ask for right now." The raw honesty of it stole her breath. He wasn't playing a game. He was trying to do the right thing, even if it wasn't what he truly wanted. "Then yes," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "I accept your offer. For now." His answering smile was like the sun breaking through a week of storm clouds. They rode away from the Dawson ranch without a backward glance, leaving the wreckage of her old life behind. Ahead lay uncertainty, a new and mysterious employer, and a future that was, for the first time, entirely her own. But as they rode, one question still burned in her mind. Who was Ethan Keller, really? And what secret was he hiding behind those clear blue eyes? The weeks turned into a month, then two. Life on the Keller ranch settled into a new kind of normal. Jessica ran the main house with a quiet efficiency, turning the dusty, neglected space into a warm and welcoming home. Ethan worked the land with a fierce dedication that bordered on obsession. He was building something, not just a ranch, but a future. And slowly, cautiously, they were building something too. Their arrangement was a fortress of propriety. She had her cabin, he had his house. They were employer and employee. But the lines blurred in the quiet moments. On the porch, after a long day, sharing a cup of coffee as the sun bled across the horizon. In the easy way, he started telling her about his plans for the ranch, asking her opinion on where to run a new fence line or which bull to buy at auction. He treated her not as a servant, but as a partner. The mystery of him remained. He was kind, honorable, hard-working. But there was a watchfulness about him, a coiled tension just beneath the surface. Sometimes she would catch him looking at her with an expression of such intense, aching tenderness that it made her breath catch in her throat. Then he would blink, and the mask of the polite employer would slide back into place. He never spoke of his family, beyond the fact that they were gone. He never spoke of a past love. He was a man without a history, a man who seemed to have appeared in her life fully formed, right when she needed him most. It was too perfect, and that perfection was what kept a small kernel of suspicion alive in her heart. One afternoon, she rode into Whitlock for supplies. She was tying her horse outside the general store when Samuel Peterson stepped out onto the porch. "Miss Dawson," he said, tipping his hat. "Good to see you looking so well." "Mr. Peterson." He gestured vaguely in the direction of her father's ranch. "Heard you'd taken a position with the new fella, Keller. Hope everything is all right." His eyes were kind but curious. The whole town was curious. "Everything is fine, thank you," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "Good, good," he nodded. "That father of yours. He came in here a few months back, you know, ranting and raving about a debt he claimed I'd invented." "He mentioned it," Jessica said carefully. Peterson shook his head. "Craziest thing. The debt was real enough, but it had already been paid. In full." Jessica froze. "Paid? By who?" "Don't know," Peterson shrugged. "A bank draft sent from Denver. Arrived the day before your Mr. Keller showed up in town. Paid off not just Thomas's bill, but the outstanding mortgage on the Wilson place, too. Cleared the way for the sale. Anonymous benefactor, I suppose. Strange business." An anonymous benefactor. A bank draft from Denver. The same city where Ethan had bought the Wilson ranch. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening jolt. It was him. Ethan had paid her father's debt. He had cleared the way to buy the ranch next door. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a plan. His arrival wasn't a happy accident. It was a calculated move. He had been setting this up from the very beginning. The kindness, the job, the respectful distance. Was it all a lie? A careful, deliberate strategy to get what he wanted. But what did he want? The Dawson ranch. Her. The ride back to the ranch was a blur of confusion and betrayal. She saw him in the corral, breaking a young colt, his movements fluid and strong. He looked up and smiled when he saw her, a genuine, unguarded smile that now felt like a dagger to her heart. She had to know the truth. As winter descended on Montana, the world shrank. Heavy snows cut them off from town for weeks at a time. The isolation should have been terrifying, but instead, it intensified the strange domestic world they had built. The ranch became an island in a sea of white, and they were its only two inhabitants. The carefully drawn lines of employer and employee began to fray, worn thin by proximity and the shared silent understanding that they were all the other had. The mystery of the paid debt lay between them, an unspoken accusation. Jessica wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but she couldn't. She was afraid. Afraid that the truth would shatter the fragile peace she had found. Afraid that the man she was beginning to fall for was a complete fraud. So she watched, and she waited. The tension finally broke on Christmas Eve. A blizzard raged outside, rattling the windows and piling drifts against the doors. Inside the main house, a fire roared in the hearth. Ethan had insisted she join him for dinner. They had roasted a wild turkey, and the house was filled with the smell of pine and roasting meat. Jessica wore her best dress, a deep green wool. When she walked in, Ethan stopped what he was doing and just stared. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't hide. After dinner, a comfortable silence settled over them. He surprised her then by pulling out an old, scarred fiddle case. "You play?" she asked, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time all night. "Not well," he admitted, looking almost shy. "But I can find a tune." He played a simple Christmas carol, the notes sweet and clear in the warm room. She found herself humming along, then singing softly. He looked at her as he played, his eyes full of a powerful, unspoken longing. When the song ended, The silence that followed was different. It was alive, humming with everything they hadn't said for months. "I have something for you," he said, setting the fiddle aside. He crossed to a small desk in the corner and came back with a folded document. He handed it to her. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was a legal document. A deed. "What is this?" she whispered. "It's the deed to the north pasture," he explained, his voice low. 10 acres, including the creek. I'm signing it over to you, Jessica. It's yours." She stared at him, stunned. "Ethan, I can't. This is too much." "It's yours," he insisted, his gaze intense. "So that no matter what happens, you have something that belongs to you. Land that no man can ever take away." Tears pricked her eyes. Independence, security. He was offering her the things she had never dared to dream of. But it didn't make sense. This grand gesture, coupled with the secret of the paid debt. It was all part of the same confusing puzzle. "Why?" she finally managed to ask, her voice choked. "Why are you doing all of this?" He took a deep breath, like a man about to dive into deep water. "Because I'm in love with you, Jessica." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. "Love. I have been since the moment I saw you," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "But I know that's not enough. Love shouldn't be a chain. I want you to have a choice. If you decide to stay with me, I want it to be because you want to, not because you have nowhere else to go." Her mind was spinning. He loved her. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. But the lies, the secrets, the debt, she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "My father's debt to Mr. Peterson. You paid it, didn't you? From Denver, before you ever came here." The color drained from his face. The mask was gone. All that was left was a raw, aching vulnerability. He nodded slowly. "Yes." "Why?" she pressed, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Why all the secrecy? The careful plan? What do you really want, Ethan?" He looked down at his calloused hands, then back up at her, and his eyes were filled with a pain that stretched back years. "I wasn't just buying the ranch next door, Jessica," he said quietly. "I was keeping a promise." "A promise? To who?" He hesitated, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "To your mother." The world tilted on its axis. Her mother. He had known her mother. I don't understand." "I was just a kid," he said, his voice distant, lost in memory. "My family was passing through on our way west. We wintered here. Your mother, she was the kindest person I'd ever met. My own ma was sick, and your mother looked after us. She brought us food, medicine. She read stories to me. She was like an angel." He paused, swallowing hard. "But I saw the way your father treated her. The anger, the control. It scared me. Before we left that spring, I found her crying by the creek. I was just a boy, but I promised her. I told her that one day I'd come back. I promised I'd be strong enough and rich enough to make sure her daughter, her little Jessica, would always be safe." He looked at her, his soul bared in his gaze. "It was a foolish, childish promise. But I never forgot it. I spent the next 15 years working, saving, planning, just to get back here, to keep that promise, the debt, the land. It was all just a way to get close to you, to be there in case you ever needed someone to stand between you and the storm. It was all too much. The lies weren't lies. They were the framework of a promise made by a boy and kept by a man. He hadn't come here to take anything. He had come here to give her everything. Freedom, safety, a choice. So when I saw him raise his hand to you that day," he trailed off, his jaw tight. "It wasn't just about a stranger being mistreated. It was about failing her, failing my promise. I couldn't let that happen." Jessica stared at the man before her, a man she thought she knew, but had never really seen at all. The mystery was solved, and the truth was more beautiful and heartbreaking than anything she could have ever imagined. He had loved her before he even knew her. She stepped forward, closing the small distance between them. She placed the deed on the table. She didn't need it. Not anymore. "I choose to stay, Ethan Keller," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Not for the land, for you." When he kissed her, it wasn't the gentle, hesitant kiss of a hopeful suitor. It was the desperate, soul-deep kiss of a man who had waited a lifetime for this one moment. It was a promise kept, a future begun. And in his arms, Jessica was finally, truly, home. They were married in the spring, when the wildflowers turned the valley into a carpet of color. It was a small ceremony on their ranch, under an arch of blooming lilacs. On the morning of the wedding, Mrs. Walsh arrived, carrying not a gift, but a letter. It was from her father. His handwriting was shaky, but the words were clear. He was sorry. He knew he had failed her and her mother. He hoped she would find the happiness he had been unable to give. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely, but it was a start. It was a release. As she walked toward Ethan, waiting for her under the flowers, she felt a profound sense of peace. The man who had stepped in to stop a fist was now standing ready to offer his hand, his heart, his life. Not as a savior, but as a partner. "You look like a dream," he whispered as she took his hand. She smiled, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "Not a dream," she said, squeezing his hand. "This is real." "Our future," he corrected softly, his eyes filled with a love that was 15 years in the making. A love strong enough to cross decades and keep a sacred promise. And they knew, with a certainty that settled deep in their bones, that it was a love that would last a lifetime. If you were moved by Jessica and Ethan's story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of love and justice on the frontier.